We're back. We're talking about whether there is any value to higher education. This is Civil Discourse Now. My name is Mark Small. I'm an attorney here in Indianapolis. Paul Watkins, my co-host for this show. Our guests this week are Matt Stone, who's Libertarian candidate for City County Council here in Indianapolis, and also a blogger on Indy Student Blog, and Jeff Cox, also an Indianapolis attorney and a blogger on No Boxes Allowed. Big Hat Books is an excellent bookstore here in Broad Ripple, which is on the north side of Indianapolis. They also rent space for various occasions. This is the space that we're in. So definitely stop by here, browse through the books. If you've got an occasion you need to rent out space for, and it's very reasonably priced, and it's a neat area of the city. Jeff, you were just finishing up on something you were saying about how they kept pounding science into you.
Well, yeah, as an engineering major, they kept pounding math, physics, chemistry, graphics, dynamics, mathematical analysis, all of that constantly, day in, day out. There was never a break from it. There was.
I had a friend who was at Purdue University who was who was a double E major, electrical engineering, and I was on staff at Purdue for about 4 years. And he said, I really would like to take a course in music British. And I said, well, why don't you? And he said, well, first of all, Purdue doesn't have a school of music. It's the only Big Ten school that doesn't. But I think they did have classes in music appreciation, but that didn't matter because he said, well, I can't. And I said, what do you mean you can't? You can do it elective. And he said, no, I'm a double E major. And I said, what does that mean? He said, our department tells us what electives we're going to take. And that kind of defeats the purpose, I think, of being a university.
Well, that's part of the problem. When I was able to take classes that weren't in the science or math dynamic, it felt like a breath of fresh air. When I took Middle Eastern studies, I took classical studies, it was like I was living it again. That's when I determined that I hated engineering, that I couldn't do it very well, and that I'd change majors at that point. So when you produce these people who've got this great training in science and engineering, I wonder if they're capable of thinking outside of that realm. And I come to this question not only based on my experience, where you get nothing but that science background, but when you go out, I'll just use roads as an example. The roads we drive on today. Sometimes I'm amazed that someone actually designed a road this way and thought that it would work. Thought that people would actually find it easy to use.
So there's another aspect, and that's like, I don't know if you call it critical thinking. I know there's a school of thought that talks about critical thinking or problem solving or whatever it is, but it has more to do with the general nature of being a person than specialty of a major in a school.
I think Jeff's making the argument for liberal arts.
That's right. And that's what I'm talking about too, is I'm in favor of liberal arts because I think that rounds out the personality. A person learns how to think about certain things. You learn more about the world. You learn more about problem solving.
But does that make you more marketable to the private sector when you go out and look for a job? I know it makes you a better person, I think you could say, but does it make you more marketable?
I think to an extent it does. I remember I was sitting in my, after I switched from journalism, I switched to English. I was sitting in my English advisor's office, and I saw this letter of acceptance from one of her students saying that her poetry major, or something like that, got accepted to med school. And I asked her, what is a poetry major doing going to med school? And she's like, well, despite popular belief, there's no such thing as a pre-med major. You just take certain science-based classes, and you do well in everything else, and then they'll look over your application. And I guess, and med schools are going around to the liberal arts because they want doctors who can not only ace their science classes, but they also want people who can write a good paper, and not only to communicate, publish in medical journals, but to communicate to patients as well. As someone who's spent a lot of time with doctors in hospitals, some of them are really bad at communicating needs and what you need to do with medicine and stuff like that, and some of them are really good. And that's something that should be emphasized, especially in these professions, such as some lawyer fields and some medical fields, where there's a lot of human contact. Just because people who spend the last 12 years of school, they always come out and talk to normal common folk the same way that you do in academia.
Well, when you're looking at doctors, the one thing that they have to do is is that they have to determine which one of those people really has a soul, and then they have to get beyond the people who just be really avaricious about spiking grade point averages and screwing people up on the curve in a class. But that aside, a different aspect of education today, higher education, is the proliferation of online schools. Because I sit there and we were forget where, but I was watching this ad for an online school, and it was like, call our admissions hotline, and they misspelled admissions. And so I called the admissions hotline to point out the error in the spelling on their ad, and the person in the boiler room, wherever it was, they were answering, wasn't interested in hearing about my correction of the spelling in their ad. But I just wonder if people, first of all, they're as expensive, the online schools are as expensive as conventional schools. Secondly, they don't know who's taking those tests. When you get down to it, a lot of them don't have the controls. So a person can, skate and have somebody take tests for them. Third, you don't have interaction with other people. You're not interacting with other human beings. So there's a part of education is reading a book and knowing what it says and being able to talk about that topic. But another part is interacting with other human beings.
Well, let me use probably a better example than I had earlier. It was several years ago, I got into a discussion, you might want to call it, with an engineer at Microsoft. We're talking about the Xbox 360. And I was asking him about the overheating problems that they were having with the Xbox 360 that were causing them to have to replace so many of them. And he said, well, the problem is that people are putting this Xbox 360 console in their entertainment centers. That's a restricted area. You can't put this kind of computing power in a restricted area like that. It needs air to dissipate the heat. And I said, what did you think people were going to do with this entertainment console? Did you think they were going to build an altar in the middle of the family room so that there would be proper ventilation? Or did you think that more likely they're going to put it next to their DVD player, their VCR, or whatever in their entertainment center? And he looked at me like I had given, like he was a starving person being given a piece of wax fruit. He couldn't conceive of that. And that's the problem. You have people who are in many of these science areas, they're technically apt, but they can't think. That is what the humanities courses are for. And it also makes, to touch on your point, a more informed and better society. Right now, we have people who don't understand how the U.S. government is structured. There is a certain lacking of civics. They don't understand that we've got 3 branches of government. They don't understand the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, or that the timeline that it all goes back to the Code of Hammurabi, the 10 Commandments, Athenian democracy, Roman Republic, everything along those lines. People don't understand that.
I think CNN considers an informed voter someone who knows who the vice president and knows who the Speaker of the House is. Doesn't necessarily know any of their duties or anything beyond that. They basically know the people who actually occupy
The vice president has no duties.
No, the vice president has 2 duties.
Well,
one, to replace the president of the United States in the event the president dies or is incapacitated, and 2, to preside over the Senate. Sarah Palin was asked that twice. The first time she didn't know the answer. A couple of weeks later, I would have had plenty of time to read that 30 seconds that it would have taken from a book. She still didn't know the answer.
Mark, you can interrupt. I assume Matt, being younger than we are, that maybe he's taken some online classes. Have you?
I've always been in actual schools. I think I've had some friends who've done online classes while still being enrolled in universities, but I've never had people who go to an exclusively online school. Some of those can be really, really shady.
Yeah, there's
the University of Phoenix is like the way lots of universities do online classes is you take the classes online, but you have to come in person to take like the midterm and the final.
Yeah, because like Purdue University, 25% of the students, I read a couple weeks ago, and this could be inaccurate, 25% of the students on campus in West Lafayette take at least one online course.
And that's not uncommon because, with people, students these days aren't just taking classes and they have social. They got to work, they might have family obligations, and as well as classes. So online, allows some flexibility, especially in classes that don't necessarily meet the threshold of like I think the minimum at IUPUI was like you have to have at least 20 students in your class. And if it's a new course, like an African American Studies course, then you need to have a really full class, or else it's going to get canceled. And online classes kind of have some flexibility to that, and it just makes it easier for people to take, especially when you're trying to fit in general studies courses and stuff like that. But besides stuff like WGU, the recently started state online university, stuff like University of Phoenix and these for-profit colleges, those can be really shaky.
The University of Phoenix, as many students as they have, I'm surprised they aren't highly ranked in football. But although I would imagine their online team was pretty good. They probably do well in football.
They probably do well in Madden.
That's true.
One thing we haven't talked about is the value of advanced degrees, whether it be a PhD, a JD, or MBA. I think that a lot of times where people think, oh, I've got the college under my belt, I can go out and get an MBA, or I can go out and get a JD. I'm going to be so much more marketable.
Don't get a law degree.
There's a lot of truth to that because a lot of time I got my law degree expecting to be able to use it in the business world and other areas, and I found out very quickly that you get the law degree, they pigeonhole you as an attorney. You go to apply for a job at some business, oh, you're an attorney. You're an attorney. And they can't seem to get beyond it. While you do have some skills that should help you out in those jobs, the employer doesn't see it that way. They see it as, oh, you're an attorney, and we don't have any attorney jobs. And they may not be willing to give you a job for $40,000 a year, thinking, oh, you can just leave anytime you want and get a job for 6 figures. Who knows is that true?
Well, and I did go to law school wanting to be a lawyer. And I would have to say, Paul and I had this conversation the other evening. Over half the people in my class didn't really want to go to law school. They didn't care about law school. They didn't care about the law. If they had been told that they could have gotten the same prestige and potential income by going to, some trade school or a school that taught comic book history, it wouldn't have mattered. If they had seen, because the money's there and the prestige is there, that's where they'd go. So I would say that probably less than half of my class is practicing today. I mean, I can just, from people I know being around, it was like people didn't really want to go to law school. And I think there is value to a higher degree, but I think that the undergraduate degree is what gives a person a sense of being a person. That's what an undergraduate institution is. That's why your alma mater is your alma mater. It's a soul mater.
I think that we should also look at it from the other side. Like we're talking about, is a college degree worth it in terms of the expense? We're talking about what you get out of college. The education, the statement that, hey, I'm educated because I have a degree, blah, blah, blah. But why is it so expensive? Why is college tuition rising so much faster than inflation?
Well, and I think that makes it really tough on students because, especially if they're looking at $250,000 debt when they get out of school. I mean, that's our infrastructure. That's as much an aspect of infrastructure to our country as anything else, and we're at the end of this segment. We'll be right back.